Here's the 5 main things that I personally have found are very helpful for me when I'm deciding the size of my bets. The first thing is the equity and the range of my opponents. If I know what they might have in their hands, and if I might know how much equity they have or how much of a chance they have to hit the best hand, then I'll be able to size up or size down accordingly. The second thing that I like to think about is the equity of my own hand. If my hand has a lot of equity, I'm pretty okay with the pot getting huge, and I'm okay to, to make a bigger bet. But I also remember the first point, I have to be thinking about the equity of my opponent's hand. If they don't have a strong enough hand to call my big bets, then I need to make sure to size my bets accordingly. So I need to be thinking about my equity and my range, and also their equity and their range of hands. The third point that I like to think about when it comes to choosing the size of my bets is remembering the purpose of my bet. Am I bluffing or am I value betting? And there's other little reasons you can really try, but it really comes, those are 90% of the time. It's, are you trying to make them fold or are you trying to make them call? And if you can get really clear about that, it's very surprising how even very advanced players, they don't really know why they're making a bet. Sometimes I hear players, they'll say, well, I thought I had the best hand, so I wanted them to fold. And I'm thinking, well, if you have the best hand, why do you want them to fold? Because I don't want them to catch up and get lucky. But you have the best hand, you have the most equity, you've got a great hand. People don't have it always congruent and logical, so you need to make sure you're very clear. The fourth thing I think about when it comes to bet sizing, it's basically thinking about the third point of what is the purpose of my bet, but then I stretch it out over all the streets. I might, for example, say, okay, so this flop could get, it's a little wet. There's a few straight draws and flush draws out there. If I bet small here, and then these kinds of cards could come out on the turn, I'm gonna bet a little larger, and I'm gonna prepare for a large bluff on the river on certain types of cards because of my certain hand. And so you're thinking, what I'm choosing is, I'm choosing a smaller bet size on the flop because he might fold, but I'm also building up a big enough pot to be able to bluff them off later. So I'm really thinking of future streets at a time, but I'm choosing the size on different types of flops or turns and then rivers. So what I'm really thinking of is, am I bluffing or not? Using the third step and then trying to take that into multi-streets. The fifth thing that I like to think about when it comes to my bet sizes is, am I balancing my range? What that means is, when I bluff, I should be making those look kind of similar to my strong value hands, and that's going to keep it balanced. I don't want to play my strong hands this way and then my bluffs this way. You kind of want to keep them pretty balanced, because pretty good players will catch on to those bet sizing tells. Sometimes I'm like, the pot is $700. I've got the nuts on the river. I really want them to call me, so I'll just bet $40. But here's the thing is like, you have to ask yourself, would I ever bluff with $40? Is there any type of bluff that would be in my range where I would bet $40 on this river? A lot of times the answer is no. Sometimes I will sacrifice profit. I will sacrifice the little amount they would call me with to make sure that my range is balanced, because players will catch on. They will know if you are betting small or large with different types of hands. You still got to make your $300 bet on the river if that's kind of what you would do to bluff. Maybe you could kind of like get away with doing, like, if you normally do 300 with bluffing, maybe you do 240 with your strong hands. It's close enough to where you can kind of keep it balanced, if that makes sense. That's really a huge part of what will determine my bet sizes. I think, what hands would I bluff with in my range, and what hands would I bet for value in my range? And if you're not keeping them kind of balanced, if they're not the same sizings or close to it, then you should probably make adjustments so that way you can get paid whenever you actually have a good hand. I see a lot of players and they get frustrated. I never get called. No one ever calls me. A huge part of that is because you never bluff, or you don't balance your range enough to where you're bluffing enough. And some players are they're like, I always get called. That's because you're bluffing too much, bro. And your bet sizes actually give that away a lot. So make sure your bet sizes are not giving off tells and you're keeping it balanced.